Thank you so much, Himanshu, for joining in today. So you see that this pandemic has caused a lot of disruption in the education system, right? So it has also highlighted and captured the strategic shortcomings and kind of failures of majority of our Indian institutions as well as regulatory bodies. So where do you think the problem is?
So I think the biggest problem lies in the fact that none of the institutions or the universities, or for that matter, the entire education, gamut of education institutions had a digital strategy. So we did not have a digital strategy to begin with. We did have classes which were going online. We did have some online systems. We did have e-material, but there was no coherent strategy as to how are we going to go digital and how much money, how much resources, how many resources do we need to invest into it. And I think that is where we were caught a little unawares when this pandemic came, because this was completely unforeseen. And not only was it unforeseen, but the scale with which it has expanded is unprecedented. We have heard of stories of similar pandemics in the past, but this is the first time that at least I am seeing this in my lifetime, and therefore certainly people like us are seeing it for the first time in the lifetime. And therefore, I think we were caught unawares because we were not fast enough. So I wouldn't say that we did not have the infrastructure at all. We did have the infrastructure. The government had taken steps. The universities were taking steps, but not at the same pace as some of the better institutions and universities.
We have around 993 universities, and only 7 out of those universities are given license to run online courses, right? So what happens is they were not prepared, first of all, because they didn't have the access to run and they did not think in that direction. And also, now the thing is that is it a right step in order to, massify kind of, totally take education to another level?
To understand the difference between what they were allowed to do and what they were not allowed to do. So it is not that the universities were not allowed to run online courses. They were not allowed to have online programs. And that's a completely different thing, which means that they were not allowed to have online degree programs. But nonetheless, universities were always, and I think continue to be allowed to have online programs as a part of their overall online courses as a part of their overall program, but not a completely online thing. So I think going ahead, not just the universities, but I think all the institutions, be they management institutions or engineering institutions or your commerce graduate, everybody is going to increasingly look at blended programs. And since they are going to look at blended programs, there are two, three things which become important. First, I'm very, very categorical in saying this. Nothing can replace an in-class experience. And that I have absolutely no doubt about. So for all of those people who think that online courses will completely replace in-class courses, or online education is going to be the future and there will be no in-class programs at all. No, not at all. I mean, it's the same thing that when print went to digital, people said, oh, people are just going to read ebooks. Nobody's going to read physical books, but physical books continue to be read. And in fact, in times such as this, when people are in a lockdown, they're actually looking for physical books rather than ebooks, because they spend so much time looking at the screen any which way while they're doing their work. And therefore, the classroom education will stay, not for any other reason, but for the simple fact that a whole lot of learning, especially in the university system or higher education institutions such as ours, a lot of learning happens within the peer group. So when the peer group sits together, it's not that knowledge and gyan comes from only one side of the classroom. It's not a one-way gyan session, but a lot of knowledge is created within the group which is in there. And when they meet physically, it's a completely different experience than when they meet online. So that is one. With that caveat, however, people are increasingly going to look at, and universities are increasingly going to look at blended programs. And therefore, the other two issues that we will need to consider is, how are you going to actually establish the equivalence between an in-class hour and between an online hour? And even within the online hour, you have two different categories of imparting that particular online hour. One is in the synchronous mode, where, for example, we are talking to each other. This is a synchronous mode. So as I speak, you're listening to me in real time. And the other is that asynchronous mode. So let's say once you put this interview together, you're going to put it out there, and then people can actually download it on their desktops or stream it on their desktops and listen. And that is an asynchronous mode model. So how do you establish the equivalence between an in-class hour and between synchronous online and asynchronous online? That is something where I think a collective decision needs to be made. And the third issue is obviously going to be that of infrastructure. How can we create an infrastructure which can bring us very, very close to the classroom experience? Because I said, when you're having a discussion, I'll talk only about IIM Indore. So at IIM Indore, we follow the case discussion method. So each of the cases that is discussed has a decision problem. So it's a case of a decision problem. The case leaves you at a point where the protagonist has to now make a decision. And then the class has a discussion around that as to how that decision needs to be made, or what is the decision that you would make, what are the pros and cons of a particular alternative that you're suggesting. Now, all of that happens in a classroom. It's very easy for people to look at each other at the same time. Now, when you do it at the online mode, one, people will not be able to see each other at the same time. They will probably see them as individuals. So, if you have 20 people over here, I can't see all 20 at the same time. And more importantly, I will not be able to see their facial expressions. And we teach that in the theory of communication, that a lot of communication happens through non-verbal behavior. So if I look at your face, I can figure out whether you like my answers or not, rather than what you're saying, in so many words, etc. Now, all of that gets lost when we go to an online session, and therefore, what is the kind of infrastructure that is required to bring the experience as close to that? So I think the universities will have to go that way. They have to massively upgrade their infrastructure, and they will have to ensure that they make their classrooms far more smarter than they are currently.
This is university's part, right? But how about the regulation? How should they go about it? Because you know that in India we need a lot of push, right? So if you allow them, you give them license, you give them a little more free hand, then maybe university will start preparing themselves. But right now they know that, okay, I can't run online programs. So I mean, how do I invest? What do I do? So what is the solution to that?
See, I think the solution to this is a graded solution. So first of all, for example, what the government did was to categorize institutions. So they said these are the higher education institutions, and these are the institutions of national importance. These are the institutions which are the second in category, so far and so on and so forth. And they also created the NIRF rankings. So what they can do is that basis the NIRF rankings, they can give those kind of licenses, say, to the top 50 institutions, number one. And for the remaining institutions, they can have people from these top institutions as mentors for the other institutions. So an institution, for example, IIM Indore can possibly become a mentor to a couple of universities around in Madhya Pradesh. And with our mentorship, those universities can then develop programs. And once we say that, okay, they meet the quality standards, the relevant quality standards that are required, subsequently, the UGC or whatever the governing body is can make a decision and start allowing licensing. You are absolutely right, Rana, in the sense it is an imperative. It has to be done. But at the same time, it cannot be done at the cost of academic rigor. Because I am aware of certain colleges which talk about an online course, but that online course is nothing but clips of videos put together from sources without violating all the intellectual property rights as well, but just videos clipped together and then being tom-tommed as a complete course. Now, clearly, we don't want people getting degrees on the basis of such courses because they have not added any value to the academic learning or to the scholarship. So I think we'll have to balance both while allowing greater freedom to the universities. We also need to make sure that there are those checks and balances. And I think the best checks and balances can come through mentorship, through direct mentorship.
This is definitely a valid thing. I mean, I was looking forward to listening to this because everybody has, recommendations and things, but nobody has solution for that. And I'm glad that you gave me one. This is interesting. Now, okay, so because I've already spoken to you about it, and you said that IIM Indore did not see a lot of turbulence in course completion and taking things forward. So how was it possible? I mean, what was the preparedness that helped us? Yeah, I mean, helped IIM Indore in like continuing with everything during this not so good time.
Okay. So there were two, three factors. One was that we took decisions very, very quickly. So be it the decision to postpone our convocation, be it the decision to shut down the institution and shift to online classes, be it the decision to choose the appropriate platform, be it the decision to choose the agency through which we could conduct online exams, etc. We took those decisions on time and very, very quickly. That was, I think, the most important reason why we could turn around things very quickly. Second, we already had some infrastructure. So we already had the required IT infrastructure. What we do not have, did not have, and we still do not have, is a learning management system, which is our own. But we can use learning management systems which are available out there. There's several for which we do not even require to have servers within our institution, because that would be required of something where we want utmost security, like say defense or some such thing. But by using servers abroad and by using somebody else's learning management system, we can still deliver our entire programs. And the third thing which helped us was this amazing and incredible speed with which my faculty actually went online. You see, the biggest problem when you shift from an in-class mode to an online mode is not that of infrastructure, because the infrastructure is available. And in today's day and time, and for us, the Zoom didn't work, and we have immediately shifted to Skype. It just was a matter of minutes. We didn't waste any time. So the infrastructure is there. The opportunities are there. We already have the IT infrastructure. The biggest challenge comes in is the mindset. Are the people willing to change? And therefore, at IIM Indore, I've been extremely fortunate that first a bunch of people volunteered to look for the best options in terms of how to impart online education. Then all my faculty were absolutely willing and gung-ho about going online. And third and most important, some of the faculty who were not very comfortable actually came to me and said, hey, can we get some help? Some of you who are very good at online teaching, can you give us some tutorials? So we worked in this collegiate mode. We worked with this collaborative mode, and the faculty came in with all their humility, acknowledging that this is an area where they need to improve. And I'm so happy that they have constantly and consistently improved over a period of time, even in terms of the delivery. So I think these three elements made us have this very quick transit from one phase to the other.
And now the thing is that UGC has come up with a set of recommendations and everything, but the problem again, as I mentioned earlier, the problem is that there are so many people to recommend, to tell you things, but nobody offers solution. Even UGC has done the same thing. It says that okay, here's a set, go ahead, do whatever you want. I am not here to help you with it. So in this time, how should universities prepare? What should be their steps forward?
See, I am obviously speaking from a place of very limited information so far as the university system is concerned. Since I'm not a part of a university system, at IIMs things move rather quickly because we have the autonomy to do so. However, what I do know about a lot of universities, and I'm sure that there are some universities who are an exception, and they are exceptional universities, but by and large, a lot of universities underutilize their funds. I know of many universities because my mother, till such time that she retired, was a part of the university system, and many people of in my family are teachers who are in the university system, are professors in the university system, and I know that a lot of their funds go unutilized. And this is not today, but this has been happening for the last 15, 20 years, that they do get funding from the government or from the government body, both from the state and the center, to carry out certain things in the university, but it lies unutilized because of some lacuna. Either the management is not very interested, or there is no champion to actually take up that initiative. So I think we need to look at both the things. The guidelines, have they been given by UGC very, very clearly? The answer is yes. Has the funding been has it been made available? The answer is yes. Now the question comes, is it being utilized or not? And there I think once again, the statutory bodies can also take a stand saying that, look, if you do not utilize your funds on time and under the heads that you have actually said, then you're not going to get any more funding. We might as well shut some of these institutions and universities rather than continue having mediocre universities around. And that would also propel other universities to actually work harder. That is one. Second, I also acknowledge the fact that a lot of these universities may not have the intellectual wherewithal to actually implement all of these. And which is where my suggestion of having mentors through a mentorship program through institutions who actually have that kind of technical capability, or at least the knowledge and the know-how, can come together. And we have it's a very simple thing according to me. I don't see we have IITs and IIMs in every state. I don't see as to why universities do not take help of these IITs and IIMs and then bring one or two people from each of them into their either board of studies or into their management board for that matter, and seek their help. I think once you have a system in place such as this, and I think here the regulatory body can once again play a play an important role by actually ensuring, by mandating that on your board, any university on your board, you necessarily need to have a person from, say, from one of these institutions. Now, the moment you do that, the help comes automatically.
So now moving ahead, how do you see? I mean, this with pandemic, everything is changing, and everything will change slowly and gradually. Even the way we impart education and everything. So, how do you think management education and Indian higher education changing post the COVID-19 times? I mean, what do you
Yeah,
think?
see, people obviously, as when they ask this question, they expect some dramatic answers. Uh,
Splendid,
Unfortunately, I
splendid
don't
words,
think that the
and
answer
I'm
is going to
really
be
convinced.
as dramatic as is expected usually when somebody asks this question, because people really think that the world is going to completely change after a pandemic. Allow me to point out a couple of things. Number one, this is not the first pandemic, and this is not going to be the last. And the world by and large has moved the way it has. And so this is one. I think the only difference is that at least that our generation is possibly seeing something of this kind at such a mass level for the first time. As I said earlier as well, that in my lifetime and yours, probably we haven't seen something like this before. So for us, it's a first experience. But such pandemics have happened in the past. And although they did create some kind of a change, they didn't bring about some radical change in the way people did things. And number three, there were some changes which were happening, and they will happen whether that this pandemic had happened or not. So we were going through the fourth industrial revolution, and that fourth industrial revolution had certain consequences, and those consequences were that dreams were becoming a reality. Things that we dreamt of were actually happening. I mean, who would have thought of 3D printing? Who would have thought of machine learning? Who would have thought of artificial intelligence? And coming to artificial intelligence and robotics, they are here to stay. Whether we like it or not, the robotics are going to take up a large proportion of the jobs which are being done currently, pandemic or not. Artificial intelligence is going to play a role increasingly in everything that we do, pandemic or not. And therefore, the landscape, so far as higher education was concerned, was already changing. I think the only thing that the pandemic would do is that the interest or the focus areas would perhaps become different. What was happening post the fourth industrial revolution was that the skills that would be required in the future were changing as compared to the skills that were required currently. So, for example, currently we were focusing more on functional skills. For example, in management education, we taught skills of marketing, finance, sales, accounting, human resource management, operations, supply chain, etc. The skills that would be required in the future are going to be skills like complex problem solving, self of understanding of self, coordination and cooperation, negotiations, sense making, uh, data analytics, and more importantly, deriving information out of data. Now, these skills are completely different from those which we are imparting today. And therefore, the entire higher education landscape has to change to ensure that we are going to impart those skills which would be required thereupon. The only thing that the pandemic will change is that earlier we were thinking that these skills of future would actually be required for these kind of industries. But with the pandemic, I think most of these skills, which means that most of the job opportunities which will come in, will be in the area of digitalization, massive digitalization of things, healthcare, hygiene, as well as things which make life more convenient. And therefore, pharmaceuticals, for example, that's another one. So the kind of industries which we were predicting are going to be the sunrise industries, they will change because of the effect of the pandemic. But that is only in the short to medium term. In the long term, there is a massive change which is going to come about simply in the kinds of jobs which will be done by human beings, and those would be expected out of people.
Makes total sense. Now that there's just one thing. There's just one thing. You talk about blended learning all the time. I think you are one of the pioneers, I would say, rather, because I have already spoken to you about all this. So I think that also blended learning is going to come into picture like post the entire thing, right? So universities, institutions, they will have to prepare themselves to run through. So why don't you highlight on that? I mean, how should they prepare for this?
So, this is something that I've been speaking on multiple fora, because this is one question where people want my advice. Even if you even if you create blended programs, how should you go about doing it? Now, whenever we try to impart a particular set of knowledge, skill, and attitudes, so there are these three elements that we talk about: knowledge, skill, and attitude. So knowledge can be imparted very easily through an online mode as well. So for example, knowledge which I give through a lecture method can be imparted as well through, by showing a video, or by actually taking a video lecture and uploading it out there. When it comes to skill, however, there is a combination of the element of knowledge and plus how to actually do it. Now there, I think something which is based on video may actually make a lot of sense, and something where you actually ask the person to physically do it while you monitor. So an apprenticeship kind of a program or a mentorship kind of a program. And when it comes to attitude, then you require a completely different set of interventions. So essentially what we will have to see, what universities will need to see or colleges will need to see, is that how can each of these three elements be delivered in the most efficient way? How can they be delivered in the most efficacious way, so that the learning is the best as compared to whatever it is that we had intended to do? And thereafter, for each of these three categories, you need to actually define the pedagogical tools, saying that I'm going to impart knowledge through such pedagogical tools, I'm going to impart skills through these pedagogical tools, and I'm going to impart attitudes or change attitudes, bring about behavioral changes through these pedagogical tools. And then look at what are those pedagogical tools which lend themselves easily to an online medium. And that is how you create a blended program, by making sure that you're using the online medium to actually impart learning in areas where it can do so very, very efficaciously. And the rest of them can be actually brought into the classroom. So for example, if I want to do a simulation, which is a one-to-one simulation, I can very easily do it in the online mode. But if it's a simulation where multiple people have to be together, in that case, it's better done in a physical space. If I have to actually teach by playing a game, it is better done in a physical space. If I have to give a lecture, I can do so in the online space. So instead of trying to arbitrarily come upon a figure and say, okay, I'm going to do 30% online and 70% in class, that doesn't make sense at all. What you need to do is, if this is the course and you have to deliver this course, what are the learning outcomes of this course? Divide the learning outcomes into knowledge, skill, and attitude. Divide knowledge, skill, and attitude components into the pedagogical tools that are required, and then make a decision, a judicious, considered decision, saying, so this much part can be actually taken online and this necessarily has to be in class.
thank you so much, Himanshu, for joining me today.
My pleasure. I'm glad that I could be of help.